Jupiter Broadcasting presents this program in stereo, where available. This episode brought to you in part by GoDaddy.com.
And welcome to the Linux Action Show, Season 18, Episode 6. My name is Chris, and not here today is Brian. In fact, if you recall from last week, Brian was out for a very special meth run. It's a little side job Brian has. And unbelievably, what happened when he was out on the meth run is he was on the Mexican border. The Mexico border, turns out there wasn't any meth for him to buy. But right on the other side of the border, there is a children's dance-off that Brian is now at the lead of. He's up against a cute little girl in a pink dress, and, well, frankly, he's just doing too well to join us today, and completely understandable, and maybe he'll be back next week. And good luck, Brian, on beating that little girl in the dance-off contest. But never fear, because always reliable and never wears a dress is Alan. Hey there, Alan. Welcome back to the show.
Chris.
So we've got actually a pretty great show today. You picked a good one to be on, and you've even injected some BSD throughout this episode, too.
Yes.
So we'll cover some of that. In fact, after our picks, which are coming up in just a couple of moments, we're going to cover a couple of things that I thought I'd tell people about. We're going to talk about the new details, how the kernel.org breach has expanded and taken down Linux.com and the LinuxFoundation.org. We'll give you the details on some new Android movement. Google's made some major plays to protect Android this week, and now HTC is suing Apple, and all of these details are coming out, and we'll share some of those, plus a bunch of other things like we've got a date when the Lightworks video editor is going to go open source and hopefully hit Linux, and then after all of that, it's our early look at Ubuntu 11.10. How is this new release coming? Are they fixing the things that we had issues with in 11.04? Because if you remember, we were pretty upset about Ubuntu 11.04. So does 11.10 fix these things? And what about these rumors that it's a power-hungry monster? We'll talk about those, too. Yeah. But, Alan, let's talk about my Runs Linux this week. This was sent in by Marcos Garcia out of Brazil, and I love this pick. This pick, Marco Garcia's software enables entire industries to run Linux. This is actually one of these things that is a meta pick, right? Because what their software does is and I'll see if I have I think I have a little video here. What their software does is it lets manufacturing plants, like say places that make goods for things to manufacture things, like, so, you know, the things that are really like industrial strong, well, something has to build those things, right? And so the video I have here is it's running on Windows, but now they've enabled it to run using Linux, and you go in and you take their existing computer infrastructure, like their PCs they have around their office and their existing servers, and you load this Linux package on them and sort of assimilate them into the collective, and then you have this overarching control of all of this, all the operations of the plant, all by just converting your existing infrastructure over to Linux. So it lets them leverage maybe the really expensive system they bought 10 years ago or 5 years ago that's Windows based, and now due to new regulations or whatever they need to switch to something new. So now they can do that without having to spend $1 million plus on replacing the hardware infrastructure. And they've even got it working on USB Live thumbsticks and all kinds of stuff. He sent a really awesome detailed Google Doc that I'll include in the show notes that gives diagrams. I mean, this guy really went all out to provide us with the info, so I just had to pick this one. I even bumped my Runs Linux for this week just to make sure I could fit this one in.
Cool.
So thanks to Marcos for sending that in.
Yeah.
Now, Alan, I've got an Android pick and a Linux pick, and you've got a BSD pick. But before we go to all of that, I've got to give you my pick for everybody out there, and that is GoDaddy.com. And in fact, GoDaddy.com is having a .com sale right now. Although, get yourself any other domain you like. I happen to be partial to the .am. We have jblive.am, although the live stream is down right now. But jblive.tv, live stream is always up there every single day. And I bought both those through GoDaddy.com. I love the .tv and .am domains. I like now because so many domains are taken to sort of work in the domain dot is part of the name of the URL. It kind of just, I don't know.
Those are called domain hacks when you try to, for example, the short URL for YouTube, right? youtube.be.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I like that. And jblive.tv is like the perfect length URL, way shorter than jupiterbroadcasting.com.
For sure.
And those are the great things you can go pick up when they're having a sale like this, because they're ones you've probably been thinking of, but you might not regularly pull the trigger. Go over to GoDaddy.com, take advantage of the $9.99 sale, use our code Linux when you check out, you'll save 10%. And if you decide to go the hosting route, if you want to get the domain name and you want to host it on one of their great shared hosting servers, use the code Linux20 and you'll save 20% on your hosting plan. And you support the show, and you support GoDaddy. So thank you for doing that, and thanks to everyone out there who I hear from every single day who says they've used our codes, and they send me the sites. I love seeing the sites you guys get when you use those codes, so keep sending them in. And if you're on Google+, send them to me on Google+, because then I like to reshare so other people can comment on it. It's kind of a cool way to get feedback on your site if you'd like it as well. All right, Alan. Let's. What do you say I cover the Android pick for this week? And
sure.
This one is good. This one's good for you.
Yeah, because I just have my new Android.
Because I'll tell you what, I know you're a BSD guy, Alan.
Yep.
And so every now and then, us Linux guys, we might confuse you. And you might not know what to do. You might get lost. And that's where our app comes in. It is Linux Commands. And this was sent to me by a gentleman on Twitter. And Linux Commands is, well... It's a little basic, but it is an Android app to let you look up what the different command line flags and options are. So maybe if you have a favorite command on here, like I don't know, apt, and you want to know what apt can do and all the different flags for apt, you can simply go on here, you look up apt, and it tells you all of the flags, give you example commands, and then if you really like it, you can tap a little favorite button, and then you keep a list of your favorite commands. Now, you would think if it's your favorite commands, you probably have everything memorized, right? But perhaps maybe it's like the rsync command where there's like 15 different flags that you use depending on what you're doing. It's nice to kind of have all that on here. Seriously, right? Seriously. So it's a free app, of course, and it helps you that's all it does is it lets you look up Linux commands. It's got a little advertising in it, but it's not very intrusive at all. And it's pretty basic, but you know what? It's got an average 4.2 rating on the Android market, and because really you don't need a lot, and for free, that's perfectly fine, right?
Yeah.
And although I'm sure some of these commands would probably match their BSD equivalents, there's always those little differences. It's mostly the man pages with some extras, but that's still pretty handy to have. And in a portable form, you can be sitting there working on something and be like, what is this command? Oh, yeah, okay, and then type it in. You can always Google it, too.
Yeah, but especially when you're at an actual terminal and it's harder to look at two screens at once.
Yes, exactly. Yep. All right. So just a quick, and now the Linux app pick thing is really it's Brian's bag. I'll be honest with you. It's not my thing, but I'm filling in for him while he's out, and you might have noticed a trend. My last app pick last week while I was filling in for Brian was also wine-based. And it's not that I'm constantly struggling to run Windows apps on Linux, but it is something I think a lot of us deal with. And I'm really, enjoying gaming lately. So it's been sort of a passion for me. And something that I always thought would be perfect for Linux is OnLive. Are you familiar with OnLive, Alan?
A little bit, yeah.
It's like the cloud gaming streaming service where they actually do all of the rendering on their end and then just send it to like this little client on your side. Well, the client's Windows and Mac based. It's not available for Linux. But using this set of steps, and I'll be honest, it's a set of steps, but using this link that I included in the show notes, and it is based for Debian, but you might be able to apply it to your own distro, you can get OnLive working under Linux. It's not perfect. It's still pretty early, and the chat room's kind of backing me up on that there. But it works, and it requires a pretty cutting-edge version of Wine. That's why you kind of have to follow the instructions. But you can actually play recent games that just do not even work, like Batman Arkham Asylum or Batman Arkham City, which will be available very soon on OnLive, that you're not going to be able to play on Linux. But if you can use OnLive, you can play these games. And they have some free plans and things like that. So, I don't know, something to check out if you've thought...
if you're trying to replace a console, it could make a big difference.
Yeah, it's a Linux pick for you, but, I realize OnLive isn't for everybody. I've gotten a lot of feedback over OnLive, and we've covered on various shows, and people just are not very enthusiastic about it. And I don't know if it's because they host all of the games or what, but I say, if you could play for a little bit and you get to do something under Linux you never got to do before, it's at least worth a shot. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's just, if, they see that there's enough demand for Linux that they maybe eventually make a Linux client, then...
Yeah. So right now it works under Wine, but all right, sir, tell me about your BSD pick.
Yes. Well, this one's a little old, but it still works. But many of the computer systems around the world are infected by penguins.
Oh, my goodness, Alan. Really? You're going there?
Yes. But more to the point, a lot of hosting providers, when you rent like a whole server,
Yeah.
they only offer Linux because
yeah.
their support people aren't very smart and can't do BSD.
Right.
Or whatever reason. They just, because it's not as popular, they just don't bother.
Yeah, they don't want to have to try to support something that only maybe 20%.
A lot of them will only offer like, Red Hat, CentOS, and no other options. So even if you wanted Ubuntu server or something, it wouldn't be an option.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Colin Percival, the FreeBSD security officer, made this tool called the Depenguinator 2.0. And basically, it's a tool that, when you have root access on a Linux machine, you can take the swap partition, overwrite that with the FreeBSD installer, modify grub up a little bit, reboot the machine, and basically reformat it remotely.
So that is so slick.
Yeah, a machine you don't have physical access to, and if you screw it up, it won't boot, but you can, make a couple changes, run a couple commands, reboot it, and all of a sudden it's FreeBSD instead of Linux.
Chat room loves it too. Yeah, that is so funny. So because that swap partition is easy it's like easy pickings. That's low hanging fruit for.
Like normally you would have to, deal with the first 40 megabytes of the hard drive or so, and when that has an active file system on it, Linux isn't going to let you overwrite it. But if you just turn swap off and overwrite that with your FreeBSD installer partition, and then configure your grub to boot off that, reboot, and now you're in there.
You could technically just reload a Linux distro this way too.
Yes, it would. Yeah.
I have a Pier 1 server that has like a separate recovery partition that if the server really goes awry, they'll reboot it into this recovery partition, and then I can mount the internal drives and recover and repair it. And it's how it saved my butt recently. This is a whole other thing though.
Yeah, a couple of my providers have similar things, but it's a rescue system. So what it is via the control panel, you reboot your server, and their DHCP server makes it PXE boot.
I thought about setting something up like that before, just in my own networks. That seems like that would be a really sweet way to go into.
Normally, when it boots, it doesn't. It just starts off the hard drive like normal. But if you've requested the rescue system, it boots off the network, and depending on the ISP, the one that I prefer lets me pick the FreeBSD recovery system or the Linux one, and then I can fix my system.
You know who already has this licked is this is something I used in my school district days, is the Macs. You hold down like Apple N or something like that, and if you have a Mac server on your network, they'll do a network boot, and they'll boot up and reload the whole operating system. So I was thinking something exactly like that, almost like Linux terminal services, only for recovery purposes.
Yeah, and so this one basically, it boots off the network, and basically it gives you a temporary root password or SSH key, and you connect to it, and you can reinstall.
That is pretty slick. Now, of course, that was the only, in my case with the Mac server, that was the only thing I liked about it, because otherwise, I don't know if you've ever used Mac as a server.
No.
Well, there's a reason why you've never tried. It's just not the best server OS. I'm going to get some email about that, but come on, this is a Linux show.
I have used it once. I had a customer who rented like a Mac Mini in some specialty colo place.
Oh, yeah, there's a guy that does that. I guess he's not a guy anymore, but he's just like, he colos out Mac Minis.
Yeah, and it was horrible when it got replaced.
Yeah. All right, well, those are our picks, and you can find links to those in the show notes, as well as the Runs Linux. Oh, did you have something more?
It's always funny every time a new version of Depenguinator comes out. There's always this thread on Slashdot about it, and it's like a bunch of Linux admins fretting that, next time there's a vulnerability for Linux, they're going to wake up the next morning and their system's going to be running BSD instead.
Yeah, hey, you got to clean it up and get it going. Maybe that's what the, maybe that's what the Linux Foundation and Linux.com guys are doing, because we're about to talk about that. All right, Alan. Let's do the news. All right, Alan. Our top story on the news docket for this week is a continuation of a story we covered last week. It's actually another great reason to have you on the show, because we've been following this kernel.org breach on TechSnap and on the Linux Action Show. And while we're recording this one, just a couple of hours before we went live, a story broke Sunday morning that Linux.com and LinuxFoundation.org are being shut down as a result of the kernel.org compromise. This is pretty significant, a pretty significant development in this story, and I'll cover the brief details here from LinuxWeekly.net. And an email came out early this morning, that said, "Attention Linux.com and LinuxFoundation.org users. We're writing you because you have an account on Linux.com. And they go on to tell them that with any intrusion, as a matter of caution, you should consider your passwords and SSH keys compromised, and you should change them. So they want people to change their credentials, and they confirm that they've discovered a security breach that may have compromised usernames, passwords, and email addresses. They believe this breach is connected to the intrusion of kernel.org. So it sounds like, Alan, that this intrusion has spread. And I don't know. I know that all of these organizations are very interconnected, so it makes sense they have a lot of shared infrastructure too.
I think part of it might have just been that one of the users that was compromised at kernel.org happened to have an administrative account for Linux.com and, island hopping like we've talked about before.
I bet you know what? I bet you that's exactly what happened. So, again, we don't have any word of any major compromise. I mean, the kernel source code is safe. In fact,
but their servers they admitted their servers got totally owned. Yeah.
Did you see that the kernel.org guys have even thrown the kernel source code up on Git?
GitHub. Linus decided to move it to GitHub, and we have a story about that later.
Yeah, so we'll cover that in a bit. The news is pretty early at this phase, so we don't have a lot to tell you because it literally just broke a couple of hours ago. But I have a pretty big feeling this is going to be a big story throughout the week. Kind of, it's fun in one sense on Sundays to watch some of these things break and then be able to be like, I bet we'll be talking about that even more next week. And on TechSnap, we started tracking this story almost.
It's 2 weeks ago.
I was going to say, is it 2 or 3 weeks? I mean,
whenever it happened.
We started tracking the story really early, and it's been so far, I thought, handled really well.
Yep.
What is your impression on this now that we've known this has spread to even more servers? Do you think there's
that maybe somebody was using the same password at kernel.org as they do for Linux.com?
Do you have a different impression though on how the guys are handling this? Because my takeaway was they're doing a very professional job. Now
they were originally. I don't know how related Linux.com is to kernel.org. If it is related and they just didn't realize that it had been that widespread, then maybe that was their fault.
Yeah.
If they're separate and then it just happened that because somebody used the same credentials, it spread, then it's not the kernel.org guy's fault, right?
Well, when we saw this big time in the Bitcoin community, right? Remember when Mt. Gox got hacked and then people just started banging. Actually, this happened with the Gawker compromise last year, too. People just start banging on everything they can. So
yeah, well, especially when the compromise includes your password in plain text and your email address, the first thing people try is that password for that email address.
Yep.
And so, for a lot of people that use the same password for everything, that gets them in.
I feel like I have it inside me to create a video that I'm going to put out on the internet on how to do passwords securely across multiple machines, multiple sites, and multiple operating systems, because insecure passwords are becoming just such an attack vector. I mean, they're not becoming. They are like the number one attack vector. Go ahead.
That's what might have happened with the kernel.org thing is somebody's used those credentials and compromised somebody's email. And then even if they didn't use the same password, even if they had proper password security and used a different password for every site, once someone breaks into your email, they can just go to linux.com and reset your password. They have your email, so they get your new password and set it, and now they own all your accounts.
Yep.
Because this is what happened at Twitter, right? I think it was. They broke into their Google account and then reset all the other passwords.
Yeah. And it's just such a low-hanging piece of fruit that the users themselves can directly take control of and protect. So just, you guys, go out there, go change your passwords, look into LastPass, and then maybe in the future I'll do a video. In fact, I'd love to hear your tips, so leave me some comments on that. Let's move on to the next story, because it's kind of a good, good feeling one. And this is an update to a story we covered a while ago, and one that I am very interested in personally. Is we've got news here of Lightworks, the soon to be open source video editor coming to Linux, and it sounds like the target date is November, which is awesome. Soon. Now, Lightworks, of course, is a very high-end professional video editing software with all kinds of goodies. Now, the goal here is to have I believe, be in the beta stage.
Right.
By the end of November. So we're not talking something that's going to be a complete and final product. And I feel compelled to also point out to people that the editor is really only part of the solution. You also have to have a good encoding chain and good tools to manage all of that. But this is a serious tool. I mean, they've even got like custom keyboards and all kinds of stuff you can use for this.
Right. Linux has good encoding tools. It's just
it's true.
Right.
There's just not very user-friendly,
right?
In a sense.
And it's just the effects and the editing and stuff that it was lacking. And if this brings in a good chunk of that, then
oh man, I'm really excited because one of the things that we had to give up when we switched to a video version of the Linux Action Show is we had to give up having the entire Linux Action Show editing pipeline under Linux. Right. That was a big thing. I mean, we really struggled with that. When we started the show, from beginning to end, the entire show was completely produced and published under Linux, and that we felt was key. But that workflow only worked for audio only, and if we wanted to grow to video, we had to do a deal with the Tark side and get Final Cut.
Yep.
So it is quite literally, one of the number one topics that I'm trying to keep my eye on is when I'm going to be able to bring that video editing back under Linux again. So hopefully this will do it. All right, Alan, I've got...
And then the web server for the Linux Action Show got depenguinated.
That's true. But that's because it runs on Awesome Scale Engine, which you run, which uses BSD. And I've been loving it, so I don't... I am the right tool for the right guy. And we have so many of our mirror systems and infrastructure that does utilize Linux that it's all over the place. Let's talk about some Google stories. There's been a lot of movement this week on Android. Some big plays, some big tactical maneuvers. Let's start, though, with something to set the tone, because Brian and I have taken a lot of heat on this show, sometimes with our stance regarding Google, and sometimes some, questionable thing. We'll take a questionable look at some of the actions Google's doing, and one of the things that we got a little worked up about, it was Honeycomb, because Honeycomb came out, and it's still not open source to this day. And the other thing that really drives me nuts about Android is this constant policy of developing behind closed doors and then trying to wow us all with boom. And part of the thing they'll do when they do this behind closed doors development is they'll work with hardware manufacturers and give them exclusive access to the source code. All of these things, which just feel so anti-open source to me, right? Mm-hmm. So a slide came out in part of the ongoing investigation of Google and Android and Google's use of Java in Android. And I just wanted to mention this because I think it sets the tone. This is an official Google slide that came at a Google company presentation. It was marked confidential, but it's now public knowledge because of the case. And here's one of the bullet points they have. Now, in full disclosure, they say this is to help drive standards. But here's what they say. Do not develop in the open. Instead, make source code available after innovation is complete. Second bullet point, lead device concept. Give early access to hardware and software to partners who build and distribute devices to our specification, i.e. Motorola, Verizon, the Droid. They get non-contractual time-to-market advantage. In return, they align to our standards. So
what Google's saying is they'll incentivize the hardware manufacturers to follow their standard by giving them a head start.
Right.
And so that their devices come out more polished. And at the same time, Google's, by not developing in the open, they're trying to keep their competitive advantage and their new features secret until the last minute.
That's the part that kind of bugs me, though.
Yeah. Now, that is anti-open source, but would Android be as popular as if some other platform could have developed the same features at the same time by knowing what was going on?
How do you figure developing in the open would have impacted that? It seems like developing in the open only would... I guess you're saying it because it gives their competitors the advantage of knowing what's coming in the operating system?
Probably. But yeah, at the same time, maybe they could have developed all the features faster if they had open source people helping them, right?
See, that's what my argument is. I think so, too. Is I think there's a lot of little things in Android that if we actually could make contributions to would already be improved. I mean, there's things about Android that really drive me nuts still that we're not seeing. The other thing is if they could...
at the same time, would we instead end up with 6 different forks of Android?
Well, don't we kind of, though? I mean, we have Cyanogen,
Possibly.
But it's none of the official stuff. You're right. I guess... where I don't care. In the end result, whatever makes a good product that sells, that's probably the most important thing, at least for Google. When the company beats the open drum so hard, and then makes it an internal company policy to do this, it just seems so anti-open.
It does.
But we'll see. Honeycomb is I think a lost cause for us open source enthusiasts. Maybe we'll see something with Ice Cream Sandwich. We can hope, right? We can hope that once Google's ready to wow us with their innovation,
they also
we'll
need
get the source.
better names for their versions.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Let's continue our Android discussion. So you recall that Apple is sue-happy. Of course, is suing Samsung and HTC. Well, do you remember that news that Google had acquired Motorola Mobility? Well, one of the reasons they did that, of course, was for its Android patents. And Android patents, of course, are a hot commodity, and Google's already turned around and sold them to HTC, who has then already turned around and sued Apple.
Yep.
So with the newly acquired Google patents, HTC is now suing Apple.
Right. So that was Google's entire purpose of buying Motorola, was to gain this patent library.
Yeah, they claim it's not, but I mean, it's clear that this is a huge part
defensive move. They didn't want to have to buy Motorola.
And Google's doing what they should, right?
Google's too happy.
Yes. Google's protecting their partner.
Yeah, Google is working with their partners and actually defending them rather than
letting them suffer.
Normally, if Google had been some other manufacturer, just another company like HTC or Samsung or Apple,
or Microsoft,
then they would have hoarded everything to themselves and then started suing HTC, Samsung, and Apple and be like, nobody else is allowed to make a cell phone. We're the cell phone company.
It seems, though, like this could be a massively big fight. Can Google take on battles for Samsung? And just because Google bought Motorola doesn't mean that the suits that were lining up against Motorola won't still happen.
Right.
And now they're also fighting for HTC. Now, they sold these patents. Google sold these patents to HTC, but not...
Did they sell them or license them?
Well, it sounds like they sold them. It actually does sound like they sold them, which is interesting.
I guess you have to be the owner to be able to sue somebody over the patent. So.
Oh, you know what? Possibly. But it sounds like it's implied, although this isn't documented anywhere, but it sounds like they sold them for an extremely good deal. Like, they gave them a heck of a deal on these patents.
Here's all these patents for $1.
Yeah, totally. They actually implied that in the article. They're like, they actually might have sold them for as little as $1. We don't know.
Yeah. And it probably had some part that says that as part of the sale, you give Google a license to these patents forever as well.
Right. So this is interesting, too, because here's a little bit of what the patents are said to include. This is from All Things D. The patents were said to include zoom display of characters when you enter from a telephone keypad. So, like when you enter it in and the characters come up zoomed. The patent covers that they sold.
Right,
and
like on my Android, when I want to type a 0, I have to hold the button at the top for a second, and then it pops up a zoom, and I pick the 0.
Yep. Also, the technique for allowing a status bar user response on portable device graphic user interface. Boy, isn't that a lovely title?
The worst things about these patents is having a status bar. We're going to patent that.
Yeah, I know, right?
Our status bar blinks, or things slide onto the status bar instead of popping onto the status bar. So that's different. So we're going to patent this. So the patents are horrible.
There's a Florian Mueller, however you say his name. He's the FOSS patents guy, and he's followed the Google and the Android stuff for a while. He's got a little bit of a bad name in the open source community. I've continued to follow him. I don't often feature his articles on the show because I know some people don't like his stuff. I've continued to follow and fact check him though, and so I'm going to throw some of these in here. Here's what he says. Here's what he says. Here's his take on it, the FOSS Patents blogger. He says, Google knows that HTC is under tremendous legal pressure from Apple and clearly on the losing track. HTC is the first Android device maker sued by Apple, so the dispute is the most advanced stage. And since HTC's own patent portfolio is very weak, Google was, of course, pressured into doing this for them. Also, along the same lines, Microsoft has recently struck a few patent deals with Acer and ViewSonic over their use of Android and Chrome OS.
Yeah, see, those specifically was things Google was trying to prevent by buying Motorola, was to stop Motorola from making a deal like this with Microsoft.
Yep.
Because it's kind of, setting a precedent that everybody has to pay Microsoft if they want to do Android.
Well, and here's the interesting thing is HTC back in April of 2010 already agreed to pay royalties to Microsoft, and it also looks like that Microsoft is rumored to be in negotiations with Samsung over patent agreements, and Microsoft may want as much as $15 for every Android device these manufacturers sell, and for every Chrome notebook. Which, the thing about Chrome is that's Linux. I mean, that's pretty much just straight up Linux, which means they're going after these manufacturers for something they have on Linux. And that's
right.
That's the facts.
It's in the interest of Google and Linux to prevent that from happening.
I would love to know what Microsoft has on these people. I hope it's just not the VFAT crap. I hope it's not VFAT, because I know Microsoft has gone after camera manufacturers over the use of VFAT on the memory cards.
It's like we just want a file system that Windows will read.
Yeah, I know.
And Windows won't read any good file system.
Yeah, thanks for making a monopoly on the file systems you support. So we're forced to implement your own file systems, which are as old as dirt, and then you go after us.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if it is the VFAT patent, but it very much concerns me that
It's likely something like that, something bogus and useless.
I feel like these patent wars are making Linux a little toxic, and I know we in the grand scheme of things, Linux won the war against SCO, but you gotta wonder if SCO didn't slow things down for Linux and didn't slow down the adoption for Linux in some places.
Yeah, and I think that's why IBM spent $2 billion trying to get behind Linux again.
Yeah. Good point. And now here we are in the next wave, in the next generation of Linux adoption, when once again it's picked up a ton of steam, and it's the perfect solution for these devices. It's the platform the industry obviously thinks works for them. And now you have Microsoft going after them and raising these issues. And you know, it's one thing when Apple sues Samsung over copying their icons and their boxing. It's another thing when Microsoft goes after the fundamental platform that all of these devices run on, right? Don't you think?
Right. Exactly.
So I'm pretty concerned by all of this. But let's shift gears. Let's talk about the other attack vector that Android's under right now, and that's from Oracle and the Dalvik virtual machine that Android relies very heavily on. Now, this case is kind of really just kind of getting started. I know we've been talking about it for a little while, but it's actually not even at the full-fledged war mode yet. In fact, the judge is trying to avoid it. And this, again, is coming from the FOSS patent site, but I fact-checked it. And the judge has said that we want Larry Page to meet, what's his Oracle CEO's name? Larry Ellison. Larry and Larry need to meet up and talk money, is the judge's orders. It is so ordered in big, bold text here. I have the judge's orders right here. It says, it is further ordered that the conference shall be held on September 19th, and the two parties, Larry Ellison of Oracle and Larry Page of Google, must appear before the court and attempt mediation. The two respective companies immediately replied and said, well, what if we send our CEO, our top guy over here, and Oracle said, well, we'll send our top legal guy over here, and they can hash it out. And the judge said, you know, you guys are talking about some serious S here with this lawsuit, and the two owners of the company need to just sit down face to face and just have a gentleman's discussion.
That's definitely be more useful than a bunch of lawyers yelling at each other.
The FOSS Patents guy, and I can kind of follow what the FOSS Patents guy thinks, that this is the last hope of remediation. If the two owners can't come to an agreement, which the agreement would likely be in the form of some sort of licensing deal between Oracle and Android, if they can't come to an agreement, it's pretty much going to go to lawsuit time. And get dirty.
You know, it's just going to make a hell of a mess.
It is, yeah, and there's a lot of questionable stuff. There's been a few things submitted to the court that do kind of make it look like, in some cases, Google might have copied some Sun code. I don't know. We'll cover it, though, as more comes in.
Yep.
Now, this next story in the news docket, I think you might have accidentally slipped in there, didn't you?
Not accidentally.
All right. You know, I caught this one earlier in the week.
Yes, admittedly, you found it, not me. But.
Yeah, I didn't put it in the lineup, though. All right, the next story on the news docket, FreeBSD, a faster gaming platform than Linux? Phronix.com does the benchmarks. Yeah, they actually loaded up PCBSD, and then they pitted up against Ubuntu 11.04, I believe it was.
Right, but they're not running the games in native FreeBSD. They're using FreeBSD's Linux emulator, which is a kernel module that simulates the system calls that FreeBSD doesn't have that Linux does.
Oh,
so
okay.
it allows you to use Linux binaries unmodified on BSD.
Yeah, so they're running in these tests. They're still running Linux games then. So unmodified. Yeah. So you're saying just, you know, hey, these are unmodified binaries. So, you know, it's a fairly fair comparison, right?
Right. Well, it's a comparison of FreeBSD's version of the Linux kernel versus the Linux kernel.
Right.
Whereas if the game were open source, some of the games they used were proprietary, and that's why they would use the binaries. If they were open source and could be compiled, I wonder what the difference would be if running it native FreeBSD versus native Linux.
Well, I'll quit bearing the lead here. It pretty much uniformly, I'm looking for the best chart. Pretty much uniformly, in most cases, BSD beat Linux in the benchmarks. Yes. Not by an embarrassing amount, you know. In some cases,
mostly between like 8 and 14%, I think it was.
Yeah, I mean, some cases it's like.
And this is in frame rate, so it's not as
perfect.
It depends what part of frame rate you're measuring.
Yeah.
As far as when you're playing a game, one of the most important frame rates to look at is the minimum. What's the worst it ever got?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's what your eyes notice is when with the change in your frame rate, rather than the average.
Boy, some benchmarks, though, FreeBSD did quite a bit better.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that I noticed about this is that he's running on KDE in a non-3D composited desktop. And under Ubuntu, he's running it under a composited Unity desktop, which does
if
put.
you're running full screen, well, shouldn't it not make a difference?
See, I believe that Unity is still running in the background, and a lot of the Unity elements are OpenGL widgets that take video rendering. So that was brought up in the Phronix discussion. They said, hey, come on, buddy, didn't you think of this, right? And he said, well, here's the benchmarks with Unity versus GNOME 2, right? So they benchmarked on this. Yeah. There's 2 or 3 frame rate difference in some cases. I'll tell you this. I ran now, obviously, Linux Action Show. I run Linux servers. There's a lot of reasons I like Linux, but BSD obviously has some advantages. I ended up implementing in a very mission-critical banking environment where we had this box that had to hold these very time-sensitive transfers. The disk I/O demands were very demanding. And I ran 2 separate benchmarks, the same hardware. I installed FreeBSD, and I ran a series of disk I/O tests, and then I ran Linux, and I ran a series of disk I/O tests. What I discovered after doing some research was that the disk I/O on FreeBSD was, not necessarily faster. It didn't necessarily have a faster throughput than Linux did. It had a steadier throughput. So as the demands increased and the file sizes and the number of little files increased, Linux would start to sort of have this peak and then begin to sort of not be able to keep up, where FreeBSD would essentially go up, 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 and then just sort of level off but not decrease like Linux was.
Right. That was a result of about 7 years of programming on what was called the SMP-NG. It was the next generation of symmetric multiprocessing. And it's making all the kernel operations work properly on multi-threaded machines.
And so now, even file system operations.
Yeah. And so specifically, you don't notice the difference so much on like a 2-core machine. Yeah. But if you got like a dual processors with like 6 cores each and hyper-threading, and you end up with like 16 cores, it makes a big difference.
This was like an old school server where there's actually 4 separate physical hot CPUs in the thing. It's old school.
And that's where it would make a difference.
It also, doing some Googling, I found that the SCSI, I must have been, I don't know, it was an Adaptec or a Promise. The SCSI code, the driver for the SCSI driver, was the code for the SCSI driver, was a little cleaner, I guess, under the FreeBSD. No, of course, those things are probably cleaned up now under Linux, but at the time...
But also, at the time, FreeBSD developers are more willing to work under non-disclosure agreements and stuff to see the documentation about how the card works to write the driver, whereas a lot of Linux developers wouldn't be.
And I guess this, this must have been like an HP box too. So HP kind of has a history of working with BSD as well. Yes. So I'll include a link to these benchmarks.
And then the one other difference is the FreeBSD file systems have a system called soft updates, where metadata updates, like modified time and so on file, can be done in a atomic way without having to be done synchronously. Such that small updates like that don't burden the system as much.
So it kind of caches them up, but keeps all the timestamp information correct and stuff.
Right. Yeah. So it keeps everything. The disk stays consistent. So you don't. And so the main difference with that is if after a sudden power failure, the FISC that you have to run in BSD takes like a minute, and the Linux one can take hours.
Yeah. Especially on big file systems. That's for sure.
Now BSD runs a bigger one in the background once the machine's back up, but it can wait until the machine's back up.
That's right, I remember that.
It uses snapshotting to actually run a scan on a snapshot from boot time.
There you go. I had played with one of the things I found with UFS2 in the benchmarking, and this is my personal stuff that I did years ago, was that under Linux, if I was using large files, very large, like a scanned documentation and things like that, XFS was great. I got pretty good performance on it. A lot of little files like doc files and user cache files, RiserFS was great. And extended was always somewhere in the middle. UFS, however, was generally well performing regardless of the job or task.
Right. Whether it's 1,000
little
1 megabyte files or a million 1 kilobyte files. It adapts.
I think we were on the pre-show live stream this morning when you said that we're going to cover ZFS and TechSnap pretty soon.
Yep.
That's going to be awesome. I obviously haven't played a lot with ZFS, but I've read a lot about it, and it sounds like just an awesome file system.
Yeah, we'll be building a fancy ZFS machine for Scale Engine soon, and so I'm going to put together a bunch of stuff about it. And maybe
the timing is good, sir, because I'm about to rebuild and add capacity to our editing storage system here in the studio. So I might need to tune in and listen to my own show that I'm on. No, I'm looking forward to that. All right, let's move on to a story we teased earlier on the news docket, and that is Linus Torvalds has thrown the Linux source code up on GitHub. This is one of those things where you're like, what? GitHub, really? Isn't that for regular stuff? It's not for the Linux kernel.
Well, imagine the uproar if we had put it on Google Code.
Oh yeah, for sure, right? No, this is just like I guess a temporary thing while the kernel.org compromise is being looked into.
Right.
Seems prudent.
And, well, Linus did invent Git, so.
Yeah. So it's kind of funny. And so they, being the inventor of Git, and now he's on this service built around, what an amazing achievement to have two incredible things like Git that enables so many people and Linux that enables so many people to be two different things you've made like this. And so obviously somebody went to Linus and said, so what are your thoughts on GitHub? What do you think, Linus? And Linus says, it seems to work well as a hosting space. I'm less impressed with the infrastructure to help develop things. And he goes on to talk about some of the little issues he has with pull requests and things like that, which
a lot of people have complained about that stuff.
Oh, have they? Well, I mean, the Linux project must be one of the largest projects in terms of scale, although maybe not in terms of developers. But it's so, when you put something like this on a service that hasn't had something of this caliber before, you kind of uncover a lot of these little things. Yeah. And so he said, I talked to the GitHub guys, and they're going to probably work on it. I mean, you got to figure these guys, the Linux kernel, which is pretty prestigious to have on your hosting service, and the creator of Git, which you based your entire product around, is hosting that prestigious project on your site. You're probably going to listen to his feedback.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a great story. You can read Linus's direct quotes in the show notes if you want to. All right. This one's a fun one. I thought I'd throw this in here. Haiku gains early VirtualBox guest edition drivers. I effing love VirtualBox these days, and if you remember us talking about Haiku, go check this out. You can actually get some of the nice little hardware accelerated goodies now under Haiku in VirtualBox.
Yep.
Fun story.
I was very excited when VirtualBox came to FreeBSD, so you could use it as a host.
Do you have? Is it late? Is it current? Maybe is it the latest stuff? Or is it?
I think yeah.
Because man, I have many.
It's not quite this bleeding edge, but it's close.
That's fine. I have many things to say about Oracle. Many things. But the one thing is they're not so far screwing up VirtualBox at all. It has gotten only better since they've taken them over. And it's probably just the same team doing an awesome job. And I don't know if any of them watched the Linux Action Show, but I heart you guys. Seriously, a year and a half ago, we had a show on Linux. We did a show, VMware versus VirtualBox. And at the end of our show, our conclusion by both Brian and I was VMware still has the lead. These days, though, VirtualBox is a major competitor.
Other than some really big, expensive enterprise features, VirtualBox is right up there.
So we're about to jump into the Ubuntu preview, but if what we talk about in the Ubuntu preview kind of whets your appetite, you don't have to reload your whole box. If you just want to check a distro out and see what it's capable of, VirtualBox, go check it out, people. I don't know if it's been an official Linux pick. It has been, but it is so awesome to play with Linux and try different configs and all this kind of stuff. You can try it before you buy it, basically. And
when I started playing with ZFS, it's like, I need a machine that has 10 different hard drives.
Yeah. And
if I make a VirtualBox, I can just, build 10 little hard drives.
It's so awesome for that stuff because you can create little virtual switches and have little virtual networks. And
you can build a whole network of machines. It's like, that used to require a lab, basically.
Yep, totally.
Like, I used to have a rack in my living room full of machines for when I needed to test stuff.
For people watching the video version, Alan is literally pointing to a computer rack in his living room, which has been converted into like a media center or something, right? Did you use that as a TV, that big monitor there?
No, that's a console monitor for all the machines in the bottom. But
okay.
It's basically a rack and a bookshelf.
Yeah. I love
full of like books and DVDs.
That's
and also
awesome.
Computers.
And that's in your living room. That's how hardcore Alan rolls. All right, Alan. Well, that's all the news for this week. Now this week we're going to take a look at Ubuntu 11.10. Now this is just an early preview look. It's not an official review, so there's just a couple of points I'm going to focus on, kind of show you the direction they're going in, sort of the things that I think they're improving upon from 11.04, and maybe a couple of concerns I have. Now, Alan, because you're filling in here at the last minute, you haven't gotten a chance to look at this, so I thought I'd have fun with that fact. And as we go through this quick preview here, I'm going to show a couple of things to get your take on it as a first impression to see what you think, because if I know you, I think you're going to have a couple of gripes coming up. But maybe I can press you a couple of times too. So why don't we start with the details. Ubuntu 11.04, one of the things that I think people will probably find interesting about it is that it's going to rock kernel version 3.03. So this is the first Ubuntu with the new version 3 kernel. It's got a bunch of improvements for wireless drivers and for multiprocessing. So this is just kernel alone. This is a pretty nice update. just to get these new updates right here. I got links to a bunch of the technical good stuff. Like there's GNOME 3 shell's going to be in here. KDE 4.7 is going to be up in this thing. There's all kinds of cool improvements. But let's talk about how Ubuntu's doing now. For you guys watching the video version, this is my 1110 machine here, and I will say, Unity was probably my biggest sticking point in the last Ubuntu review. And Unity and the overall UI has definitely gotten the most amount of work, and I would say feels a lot more complete. So you have your traditional menu and things like this. And one of the things I noticed right away when I was using this menu is like, God, it's really hard to get to my effing settings, right? Like I have to scroll through all this stuff. I have to say, show me all the programs, and I have to go through all these different icons. Oops, accidentally clicked stuff. But then I realized that Ubuntu is sort of refactoring this power menu over here in the corner. And if you look at this guy, they've got like all kinds of different duties that this thing is doing, including where you get your updates now, or is listed here. Managing your attached devices is handled here now. Locking your screen, doing updates, all of this stuff. Going to your system settings is handled here now instead of going through the menu. So they've sort of broken it out a little bit. And if you remember how Ubuntu used to do it, they used to have like a system menu along the top, a separate menu. And so this they're handling this here now.
I noticed the top part of the window is awfully fat, isn't it? Like,
it is, yeah. There's
the search bar to be on the same... Oh, it's because it's supposed to have tabs, I see. Yeah, when you go to the next screen and it shows the tabs, it makes a little more sense.
It overall has a pretty... Oops, not that screen. It has a pretty clean look to it. It does have some wasted space, though, Alan. You're not wrong about that. That's a pretty good observation. Watch one of the things, though, that is getting some controversy for 11.10. Check this out. So when I launch a program here, let's say my favorite web browser, Chrome, which I was surprised to see that they haven't switched over as the default yet. When you go in here, you notice if you look up along the top menu bar, there's no like file menu, no edit, nothing like that, right? And the only way to get that is if you mouse over, kind of like the Mac, where the Mac does it in a separate title bar that runs along the top of the screen. If you go over that, yeah, I know. That's one of the things I thought you wouldn't like.
Firefox and Windows by default does the same thing now with their little orange Firefox button.
Yeah, yeah. This is all applications though across the board. They all like here's the I'll show you. Here's the terminal. They all kind of hide their menu. So if I go over this area, the menu shows up. But if you didn't know to go up there to find File, Edit, and View, you would never see them. Now, while it's not a big deal, what usability enhancement does that give us? What are you improving there?
Basically, I think their goal is to hide all the scary stuff from the noobs and
keep it uncluttered. Maybe?
Why should that? Why do that at my expense?
Yeah.
Right now, it takes me longer to get to the edit menu.
Right. That's how I kind of felt about it. But I think they see it as a decluttering thing. I'm sure there must be a way to override it. I'm going for the stock config here for this review, so I haven't bothered yet.
And it brings back to the question: is like, so how much more mouse do I have to use now?
Yeah, there is. So you can here. Let's do a little exercise here. So I'll do a little. I'll hit this button. Your super key, and now let's type in terminal, TRERM, and then if I hit enter, it launches the terminal. So you can do keyboard only navigation, and it does work pretty well for that. Can
you get to the edit menu with only the keyboard?
Let's try it. So let's see here. If I hit maybe like the Alt E, yeah, you can. So then I could mouse down, but well, kind of actually. Maybe you can't.
Well, it looks like when you Windows E.
I can activate it, but I can't seem to navigate it.
Use the arrow keys?
Yeah. Nothing's happening. So maybe you can't. Okay, so that's an aside. Let's talk about what they've actually gotten right in Unity, because this is looking more and more like a polished product. First of all, they've done some things to support some of the other improvements. There's the new software center in here, which, aside from the icon, which looks like a full trash can, is really, really great. And if I install something, so let's say like I wanted to take this Minitube program, which lets you browse YouTube without having to actually go to YouTube and use Flash.
Are those supposed to be M&Ms?
No. They kind of look like it, don't they? So if I hit install here and give it my user credentials, which you'll notice over in the bar area is maybe. I guess not this time. Maybe if I'm not on it. These are all status updatable, so they can have like animations on them that tell you this icon is this application is this far in the progress, or this application needs your attention, and they can do animated notifications now and things like that.
I remember when Windows 7 got that for install programs, where the little green progress bar would be part of the taskbar.
Or in IE, if you're doing a download, it'll show you the download progress, and so it's kind of a little bit like that. Only they actually show like a progress bar instead of just coloring the icon. The overall integration here is pretty sweet, and there's people taking advantage of it too. So check this out. So one of the things that Ubuntu has, and this has just been approved upon in this, is the sound control area allows you to do volume control, but also gives you some basic music playback management. And one of the things developers can do for applications on Ubuntu now is they can write to that menu and add their own things in here. So I went out and got something called the Google Music Frame, and this is the Google Music Beta inside its own process, its own instance, right? And I can actually control this Google Music Frame, and it also supports the notification system here on Ubuntu. I can control this frame using the audio drop-down menu. And even though it's a completely separate program that wasn't shipped with this version of Ubuntu, the developer is able to write towards it. So now I can start and stop my music playback inside a completely different application, even though it's just a web app.
Yeah, by going through the volume menu, you can pause your music.
So there's a lot of nice little things that when you're working, it just gets out of your way. Another example is they still have this me menu, that's what I call it, but they've improved it a lot. So I can manage from one menu my instant message status and the networks that I'm logged into, my my broadcast accounts is what they call it, things like Twitter, Identica, Facebook, and then I can also manage my email, so I get new email notifications and Ubuntu One synchronization notifications, all from one single menu. And I can do it all while working in another program. So I don't have to jump out of what I'm doing. And this, I think, is an important part for what they're going with Unity, because I think the whole idea with Unity is everything is full screen. Kind of like it is in Lion. You can go full screen on everything, and then you could switch desktops. And so giving me these abilities to manage these things that I have to do frequently from within my own applications is really nice.
Yeah, because if you're in the middle of something and the phone rings and you want to pause your music, you don't want to have to be flipping through all your apps until you find your music player when you just, pause it from the sound menu.
Though this does have a new and very sweet Alt-Tab manager that also is very, polished looking. I guess I keep using that word, but it feels very polished. And so go check. By the way, if you're a Google Music Beta user, go get the Google Music Frame. It is so sweet. It essentially turns Google Music into its own standalone application on your desktop. And I've been loving this under Ubuntu. The thing that Ubuntu is doing in this release that sets it apart from every other distro out there right now is this massive tie-in of these services and their app store. Their app store, it is a little Apple-esque, but I mean, it is so nice to browse. And the review system's that's built in here, so you can see. So like, here's a thing that lets you manage your pointing devices, right? You can go in here and you can see what everybody's saying about it. I actually find these reviews extremely useful. Nobody, after just trying a Mandriva, Mandriva's got nothing that touches this in terms of usability. Nothing. Right. I mean, this is actually something I could give my dad, who's an Ubuntu user now, and say, here, Dad, go find your own apps. I mean,
yeah, and I think that's what they're working towards. I'm just not sure that they're doing it without alienating the core existing Linux audience.
Yeah.
But how many of those are using Ubuntu anyway, right?
I mean, if you look at our traffic stats alone, there's more people that use Ubuntu than like most other distributions combined. Fedora and SUSE rank pretty high on that list too, but like not compared to Ubuntu. It's pretty nice.
There's not much else. It's like Debian is the more hardcore version for, right?
I suppose so. Yeah. I suppose you could, or I like Mint myself, but So here I'll show you an example of how these full screen applications work. So if you go and you maximize, everything on the screen goes away. So here I'll show you. So I'll hit maximize here. The terminal, with the exception of your status bar along the top where your me menu is and the clock, everything else is gone. The sidebar launcher is gone. Just you have full screen. And they obviously want you to work in this kind of setup. And I think they're working with a design philosophy here. And that's why they do things like hide the menu bar and stuff. But in this full screen thing, the title bar and the menu bar become one thing. And if you mouse over it, it's like this weird combination of your minimize, maximize buttons, file menu, and also the title bar. It's just not, I don't think, what users are used to. So while I appreciate they're trying to create this distraction-free work environment where you can get your Zen on under Ubuntu and Unity and all this stuff, I can't help but by looking at perspective of the development processes of the various Ubuntus now, that Ubuntu might be a little bit too much designed by committee. And that they're not letting their very smart and very intelligent developers make some of the right calls. And I base some of this opinion off of a recent thread I read where a bunch of developers were answering various questions. You know, would you like to do X? Would you like to do Y? And all of these answers like, yeah, man, we'd really love to do Chrome as the default browser. Or we'd really love to have this edge rounded differently. But, you know, we have to follow the spec. We can't deviate from the spec. And I've been made to understand that the part of the canonical even review process for employees is based on, are you shipping software that meets this exact spec? And did you get in line with everything we had planned for? And while that's great for making sure you get results, at the same time, if you look at things that successful companies like Google have done, a lot of that comes from the innovative talent internally who generate a project they're passionate about and make something amazing. And Ubuntu is really coming together, but I think if they brought some more of that human passion into it, it's supposed to be Linux for humans, but it feels like it's being developed by a committee.
Like, you make a great example there. Like, I imagine something like 80% of Google's best products come from the employees' 20% time.
Right, and that's a well-known thing.
Yeah.
They're definitely on a much better track with the 11.10 release. It is looking a lot better than 11.04 did, and I think they're doing some things in here. Like, I like this new power menu where your updates and your system settings are all under one menu, very concise, very minimal. I'm kind of starting to get a little more familiar with the launcher now that I grok that, you know, I'm supposed to type everything and not click, which I'm okay with. I need to make that adjustment. And I like the information they're giving me in these icons. I am a big fan of distraction-free working, so there's some things I can get behind in this that I think maybe other people might find more challenging. But
right, like, and we were talking about during the pre-show, it's like even in Windows they've gone and like keep burying the settings deeper and deeper. It's like we need a shortcut to get to them, like you showed there in the Ubuntu.
Yeah,
it's like sure in the launcher menu they're buried, but there's a shortcut over here for the power user to just get to what they need to get to.
Great point, Alan, because you're right. You can still get to it through the regular launcher menu if you wanted to, and that's probably where a lot of people would.
It makes sense to organize these things in all these, you know, meta categories, but you need a shortcut.
Yes, yeah. So I guess one last kind of point that I know Mandriva is working on a solution for. OpenSUSE is working on an entirely different approach with the build service and all that kind of stuff. But we've talked before on the show about these online services becoming sort of the next competitive battlefield for Linux distributions, and Ubuntu is definitely getting lined up, Ubuntu 1, to be that competitive product. It's offering, you know, basic file syncing, but what I like about it is it's really well integrated into Nautilus. Like inside Nautilus, you can just be like, let's start syncing this directory. And you can do things like sync your evolution config and sync your music across systems. And we've talked a lot about Dropbox, you and I, on TechSnap.
Yes.
And it's really nice to have a good, solid competitor to Dropbox, and just on the very light testing I've done of syncing music and pictures, it seems to use less system resources than Dropbox. Dropbox seems like it can slam your disk I/O subsystem really hard, whereas Ubuntu 1 seems to be a little more Linux friendly. Like, it seems to be, I don't know if it's using like I/O notify appropriately or something like that, but it just seems to be much more lightweight. I don't even notice it's running, whereas sometimes in Dropbox I find myself waiting for it to chug through my massive directories. So Ubuntu 1, when you combine syncing of configurations and music and stuff, that's pretty good too. It's not something you couldn't roll yourself with Spider Oak or Dropbox or something like that, but hell, you know, I mean, if it's built right in and you get like 2 or 5 gigs for free, it might be worth trying.
Yeah.
So there you go. I'll have a very detailed review. In fact, I think I'm going to try to kick the tires a little bit on the KDE 4.7 edition too for the main review when it lands, because we always focus like on the GNOME Unity side on our Ubuntu reviews. So now that I got this out of my system, it should open me up to try out the KDE version for when 11.10 officially hits. So it's on track, and it's looking good.
If there was a Linux I was going to use, it would be KDE based.
Yeah.
Just because it'd be less different than what I was used to. And
yep, that makes sense. Makes sense. So give me your thoughts. Let me know what you think. But I'd say 11.10, I think they're back. I think they're back, baby. And I think they're coming back in a big way. I've also heard from a lot of viewers who think they're doing really good. But, you know, it's getting more and more competitive out there. So while this is going to be Ubuntu's move, we've also got Fedora 15 coming on the horizon. And then the new OpenSUSE. And that's really the one I'm getting excited about. So, of course, we'll cover all of that stuff in the Linux Action Show. All right, Alan. Well, that's the Linux Action Show's early look at Ubuntu 11.10. And that brings us to the end of this week's broadcast. Alan, thank you, sir, for joining me once again with
No problem.
short notice again, and you always are right there and ready to jump on, and I appreciate that. If people want to find more of Alan, you got to check out TechSnap, right, Alan?
Oh, yes.
Now,
Every Thursday.
Yeah, every Thursday we shoot it live at 1 p.m. Pacific over at jblive.tv for release Friday mornings over on the site. And last week we covered the DigiNotar, am I saying that right?
Yep.
The DigiNotar scandal, or it's not scandal, but hack or compromise, whatever you want to call it, with their SSL certificates.
Into more detail. We had covered it the week before, but a lot more information
came out. And it's really something. Like 530 different certificates compromised.
Yep.
Also, there was some interesting Google news in that episode, as well as a few other goodies, including how you and I got our start in the IT industry. We covered that. There was a viewer question that was sent in, so we answered that.
We really like getting the viewer questions. We're starting a segment talking about building home servers, because that's a question people ask us a lot. So, if you were going to build a server at home, or if you already have one, what do you do with it? What kind of features do you want in your home server? And if you tell us about that by emailing techsnap at jupiterbroadcasting.com, or going to our Reddit page, links.techsnap.tv, and tell us what you would want to see in our segment about building a home server, or what you do with your home server, so that we can decide, what to talk about.
Yep, and everyone knows I'm a fan of this topic. Last week I covered how and why I run a DNS server on my home server here at the studio.
Yep.
And Alan, you shared a few of your tips. And next week we'll come up with a whole new topic. We're going to cover it for a few weeks, so just keep tuning in, and we're going to cover the topic, take different takes on it in each episode. So, all right, man. Well, I've had a lot of you email me about Jupiter Colony. I know that a lot of you had a problem. Well, we've had a problem with spam, and I know a lot of you, as a result of that, got IP banned by mistake. I am sorry about that, and we are working on it. We're going to try to recover from that. I think we ended up banning so many IPs by accident that we've had trouble going and unbanning. So somebody got the ban stick out on the colony and just hit a little too hard. So we'll swoop in and fix that up. And also, if you want to get a hold of us during the week, of course, there's always the email address. But one of the best ways to do that is through one of our many online profiles. So go over to the show notes. You can find links to our Twitter accounts and our Google Plus accounts, which I really enjoy these days. I'm really enjoying Google Plus.
Yes,
so
we get quite a bit of feedback that way. It's quite useful.
The threaded conversation makes it much more useful for getting ideas for shows or getting people's thoughts. Like before we did the DNS topic on TechSnap, I had like a 20 comment long thread on Google Plus about what people do for their home DNS solution. And honestly, I've just started redirecting my blog to Google Plus. I'm not trying to pull like a Kevin Rose here or anything, but I update Google Plus several times a day. I don't update my blog for months. And I put all kinds of stuff on there. So I just made sense for me.
I had some people trying to get a hold of me last week. They went to my blog or whatever, and they're like, your contact us page doesn't work. It's like, I never finished building my blog.
Yeah, I don't want you to contact me via the blog because, But and the nice thing about Google Plus, too, is you don't even have to be a Google Plus user. There's like a contact me button just right on the profile. You don't even have to be a Google Plus user to use that portion of it, which is nice. So there you go. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Linux Action Show. Now, we do come out in just about every format you'd want to download over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. Also, you can find RSS feeds there to subscribe and get this show weekly automatically, so you don't even have to worry about it. It just happens, right? Magic. Show shows up in your feed reader. So go check that out, and also go check out the show notes for links to everything we talked about. And we'll see you right back here next Sunday.